Hey, everybody, KMO here. And while I am in Arkansas, I still have some connections to Vermont. And one of those connections is with Liam Madden, who is an Iraq war veteran, a peace activist, a sustainability advocate, a local entrepreneur there in not Rockingham, but you live in Windsor County or Wyndham County, right?
I live in Rockingham.
Oh, you do live in Rockingham. Okay, great. And now you are running for Congress in the for the seat that is right now held by Peter Welch, a very popular, of course, Democrat politician from Vermont. So, Liam, good to talk to you again.
It's great to see you. Yeah. Uh, of course, Peter Welch is vacating his seat. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the slightest chance in hell of winning. And I still have a very slim chance of winning, but there's no point in running against an entrenched incumbent, obviously.
Right. Particularly one who seems to have the favor of the pharmaceutical industry.
Is that right? I don't really follow him that much. What's
Okay.
the dirt there?
Oh, just that he was he was voting on legislation, and I think he may have even had a committee seat that gave him some extra clout in the arena of legislation around pharmaceuticals when he was pharmaceutical companies were some of his biggest financial supporters.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, why on earth would you want to be in Congress?
That's a good question. I mean, the canned answer is, and it's true, is I want to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the little bit less than canned answer is that I have a child, a 3-year-old. I'm soon to have a second, and I want to be able to look them in the eyes in 20 years when whatever world they've inherited, I get to say, yeah, I really tried my best to prevent dystopia, or to look at it positively, to create a regenerative, enlightened civilization as best as we could. So that's very similar to the same kind of feeling I had internally when I was a Marine Corps sergeant, looking at my surroundings and thinking, I feel like I'm part of the empire and the empire strikes back, and I need to do something to feel like I'm not a good German. And that kind of inspired my activism from within the military. It's the familiar taste in my emotional mouth of just wanting to do the best I can for the challenges that I think we're facing.
Well, what are those challenges, as succinctly as you can,
Whew,
articulate them?
well, there's there's converging crises. I
Mm-hmm.
think it all stems from the root cause that E.O. Wilson, the famous Harvard professor, I think founded evolutionary biology, puts it best. The problems with humanity are that
Evolutionary psychology, actually,
psychology,
or
correct.
sociobiology.
Um, the problems with humanity is the following: that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. So that's really the core of our issues. But I think it comes down to, um, for me, the area that I've professionally and personally been most concerned with for most of my adult life is sustainability, which I think extends far beyond just climate change. And you can't solve sustainability with an economy that is completely dependent on never ending economic growth and ballooning debt. And you can't change that economic system with the current type of collective problem solving system we have, which is rooted in a time when information traveled at the speed of horseback. So the future of humanity is in the hands of whoever controls the most advanced technology. And right now, that advanced technology is being wielded most effectively by corporate oligarchs in the form of big tech companies. And on the other hand, it's being wielded by autocratic nation states on the other. So unless the people of the world get access to this technology, uh, there won't be much of a say in the future for us. So we need to kind of re-envision democracy to be technologically empowered while still being rooted in human compassion. So I guess the crisis I'm most concerned about, it to sum it up, is definitely sustainability, but we can't solve that unless we, at a root cause level, unless we really reimagine collective problem solving. And Abraham Lincoln says it pretty well. If I had 8 hours to take down a tree, I'm going to spend 6 hours sharpening my axe. So that's where I want to focus. We need the tool that we're going to use to solve whatever the challenge is to be equipped for that task. And right now, the two-party system ain't it, baby.
Well, you'll be running, presumably as a Democrat, in an electoral process which is thoroughly dominated by the two-party system. So while I certainly share your criticism of the two-party system, and would never tire of pointing out to anybody who will listen that political parties are not anywhere mentioned in the U.S. Constitution, and all that the powers that they assert over our electoral process are powers which they have asserted and which we have not denied them.
Well put. I would make a quick correction just to jump in for clarity. I am running as an independent, and I'm running in both parties' primaries, which I think any independent should do.
Okay, very good. So, what would be your proposed, I won't say solution because, that implies that everything will be fixed perfectly and we just don't have to do anything else. But, what would be your proposed strategy for overcoming the inherent perversity of the two-party system?
I'm glad you asked. I think it operates on two levels. Well, first of all, I'm coming at this, I know my chances of winning are very slim, but I think if I can just start the conversation to shift into a broader scope, then I'm very happy with being able to do that. As I mentioned on my website, Bernie Sanders does that with Medicare for All. Andrew Yang did that with the possibility of a universal basic income. Not saying I 100% endorse either of those things. I'm just saying they did that. They lost their campaigns, but succeeded in bringing into the Overton window or public consciousness a new issue. So that said, my solution, as you put it, would be to acknowledge that this needs to happen on two levels. That on the personal level, where we interact with each other, there's a fair amount of education in empathy, strengthening empathy, in sense making together, to be able to take on someone else's perspective and actually see the value in it, and to refine our ability to discourse with each other and learn from each other. So I think that's on a personal level, but on the institutional level, which I think people want you to quickly jump to, is we need the collective wisdom of the people and the shared values of the people to be closer to the heart of political decision making. And technology makes that possible. There's no reason why we can't get the input of public desire, opinion, whatever, into the decision-making process more than every 2 or 4 years. It can happen close to real time. Technologically, it's an obvious reality. They can take input from the public way more than every 2 or 4 years where you get to choose between the lesser of two evils. So add to that layer that they just get public input. A system where if a certain amount of support is generated for a certain idea, or maybe especially when certain amounts of support are generated for a certain idea across ideological boundaries or perceived ideological boundaries, then it automatically forces the existing legislators to act meaningfully on that idea. And then you can add another layer in which, if there's enough support for a given idea, that it's not just they have to act or respond to this, but it bypasses politicians altogether and becomes a policy. So there's technically not a problem with doing that type of thing. Obviously, there's lots of safeguards you should build into such a system. But the thing that you want to add on to that is not just do people's ideas get into the public sphere, but do we get the best ideas? And I think that's also possible with existing technology. If you just look at social media, the same algorithms and artificial intelligence enhanced yada, 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 that are currently driving rampant polarization and enforced echo chambers can simply just be pointed the other direction, just like the splitting the atom can destroy the city or power it. So if you aim that technology at iterating on those areas where there's the highest unexpected consensus between both sides, and instead of upregulating the vitriol, you upregulate where there's compassion and perspective taking, I think you get the opportunity to bring to the surface of those, of the rabble of ideas that would certainly be washing through that type of forum all the time. You would start to see it upregulate the ideas that are actually the best. And instead of just stopping all improvement at 50% plus one, which is what happens now, any law that happens is just getting to that bare minimum level of support where 49% of the population feels like they're the out group, and then probably just switches it, whatever, all the progress that was made in that area back the other direction in 4 years. You can set a higher bar where the process iterates on the best ideas, and then maybe you get to 80% favorability of certain solutions because it's given the time and context to actually get there. It doesn't just stop improving. It doesn't stop deliberating at 50%. So these are some ideas. I call it technologically initiated democracy. It's not pie in the sky technically, that's for sure. It's just about, can we bring this into the conversation and realize that the collective wisdom of the 535 bootlicking 1% gatekeepers that are the current representative class does not represent or have access to all of the collective wisdom we actually need and should be using, which is the collective wisdom of our entire population. And putting that through the process of filtering in the best ideas. So does that answer your question? I know that was not succinct, but we have a little bit of time.
What was that phrase you used? Did you say technologically mediated democracy?
I called it technologically initiated.
Initiated. All right. So if the voters of Vermont select you to represent them in the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C., your job there will be to, if you are lucky, propose some legislation that comes up for a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives, and more often to vote yes or no on legislation proposed by your peers there. What sort of legislation could you introduce that would allow for technologically initiated democracy to take place?
Basically everything I just said put into the form of legalistic technical jargon of how to write a bill, which is not my strong suit. I think I would have to delegate that to team members around me that are really good at that. But I don't think that's my role. My role is to start the conversation and to gather people who are interested in doing this and realizing that it's a possibility, and then we can find the skill sets necessary to actually implement it, because I don't have the computer science degrees or any of that skill set, but I just recognize it's important, and to me the only option that's actually adequate to the challenge.
Well, government is force. The difference between, say, a vlogger or, a movie star or somebody who's got a platform but no governmental power is that they can propose ideas, they can articulate them, hopefully in an inspiring way, but you can't actually say to anybody in particular, you must change what you're doing and do things this way. The government can do that. So you were talking about big tech. How would you change the relationship between Washington, D.C. and, say, Google?
Good question. Well, the first thing I would like to comment, just as a step back in the context there, is that when they look at the situation of what big tech has done to our ability to sense make collectively, the only option they come up with is, well, censorship. We'll just get rid of people whose opinion we don't like. And I think that is, first of all, disturbing to me. So I would be against that. That would be one thing, like to to ease up on pressuring big tech companies to censor people that are the current dissidents. I'm strongly against that. I was kicked off of Facebook. I am one of the wrong thinking dissidents. So I think that kind of shows people where I'm coming from. And I think the bigger picture is, power the city, don't destroy the city with this technology. How can we have Google start using its algorithms, which is all that Google is a bunch of algorithms that upregulate certain types of information, to start upregulating the information that allows people to basically become more mature human beings that see other people's perspectives with a lot more grounded compassion and maturity. But in terms of how Google relates to, they're touching our society in a million different points. What would I want our government's relationship to be? I mean, I think I just gave you the broad answer, but if you want me to be more specific, I think you have to kind of guide me in a little bit deeper.
Let's switch from Google to Twitter. Twitter is a much smaller company. It has far fewer products. It touches our lives in fewer ways, but it's very influential because everybody who is anybody in government or the corporate media, they use Twitter basically as a means of putting out press releases. But there's also this current on Twitter of extreme thought control and extreme purity testing, and people are called upon to denounce others on Twitter. And any society in which people are regularly being called upon to denounce their peers in public, that's got very creepy sort of Maoist overtones to it, or at least totalitarian overtones. But that's Twitter. Would you not suggest, I mean, suppose we're talking about the use of government power. Would you tell Twitter point blank, look, you have banned, he was a sitting president at the time, now he's the former president, he might well be the sitting president again, from posting on your platform? That's unacceptable. You have to reinstate the Twitter account of Donald J. Trump. Is that a position that you would take?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not an extremist fundamentally on many things, but I think I near free speech extremism. I agree with whatever Supreme Court justice says. You can't yell fire in a burning, in a crowded theater.
You better if you yell fire in a burning theater, though. But yes,
the stepbrother of that, that Supreme Court justice said that way. You better yell fire in a burning theater. So yeah, I am a pretty frothing at the mouth free speech zealot. I think it's just so rife for abuse as soon as you start saying that these voices are allowed and these voices are not. And instead of censoring misinformation, I believe it's an old Buddhist proverb that if you know you're about to walk a journey and the path is littered with thorns, it's much easier to just wear sandals than to pave the entire path. And I think that's my approach to disinformation and misinformation. It's out there, but if people are equipped with the sandals of critical thinking and media literacy tools, better collective sense making, they don't need to wipe out the entire ecosystem to remove the thorns.
If the heights are weathering, take a jacket.
What was that one?
If the heights are weathering, take a jacket.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. But this various institutions in our culture for decades now have been deliberately sabotaging the ability of people to make sense of the information with which they are presented. And as far as I can tell, you can't just pass legislation saying that people will now be media literate or people will now be critical thinkers. That sort of access to the root layer of human psychology is just, it's not within the legislator's purview.
I agree. Yeah, there's an enormous part of this equation that is the job of culture, not the job of government to deal with. And I just think that they're not completely delineated clearly boundaries there, right? Culture can influence policy, and it does, and policy can influence culture as well.
So Bernie Sanders joined the Democratic Party to run for president on the Democratic ticket, but before that, I think he had been an independent. And
yeah,
but he did caucus with the Democrats. I mean,
yes.
You don't just write legislation and propose it and then vote on it in Congress. I mean, really, what you're there to do is to form coalitions with like-minded people. and then collectively, craft legislation and then canvass your peers to see if there's any possibility of getting it passed. Who would be your natural allies, do you think, in
Mm,
Congress?
I don't know. I don't know. I've thought about that a little, and I was, is there any precedent for someone caucusing with both parties? That's what I would want to do. I bet there
Mm-hmm.
is no precedent for that. Um, yeah, I don't know. I think the name AOC comes to mind as someone who kind of came to office with this firebrand, make the system radically different than anything else the Republicans the Democrats are putting on offer. I don't think she's the same person that ran on that when she first got elected.
She joined the power structure very quickly.
Very quickly, yeah. So I I don't know, and I also don't pay attention to politics so closely that I know people's personalities or all the nuances of who's interested in what. So I think I would have to, on the chance I get elected, spend that 3 months of lead time before I actually went to office to do some research about that and to start making friends.
And how are you prepared to resist psychologically when they back a dump truck full of money up to your house?
I think the idea of term limits is huge. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
knowing that I'm coming back to a normal life. I this isn't my identity or career, or it's just a segment of time to be of service. That's helpful. That's not everything, but that's helpful. Um, Also, a dump truck full of money doesn't achieve what I want from doing this, which is the future that my children will live in, being a just, healthy, uh, wise civilization. So it doesn't do that. So it's not really doing that much for me. There's some phrase, I forget what it's called. Someone told it to me recently, but it's the idea that beyond a certain amount of money, you actually stop becoming more and more happy. And I think that's around $70,000 a year. I don't know if that's adjusted for inflation. Um, Coincidentally, that same thing happens with energy, and energy and money are very closely linked. Um, but yeah, beyond a certain amount of money, like, it's not going to make me happier.
You know, Scientifically, that does seem to be the case. That somewhere between 70 and $100,000, your the happiness that you can wring out of money pretty much tops out.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just about everybody thinks they need just a little bit more,
Yeah.
just a little bit more, and I'll be okay. Which is what keeps,
20%, 20% more.
yeah, which is like from my perspective, if you're a billionaire and you're still looking to make more money, you have missed the whole point. It's like you've got the money. The
Mhm.
money's done.
No, at
Move
that
on
point,
to
money
whatever it
is
was
just
the money was supposed to do for you. Go on.
money is just their status for their friends. I'm saying, like, I'm still good at making money, guys. I'm good. I'm good at
Mhm.
what we do.
So, talk about other issues. I mean, I know that you were a bit of a heretic on COVID. How will you address that when it comes up in the campaign?
I'm pretty straightforward with my take on my website. I say, there's headings, and the heading is dispel COVID fear, and
Hmm.
I think a lot of what happened to the COVID response was, you called it once we talked about it, the fear is the mind killer, and I think
Hmm.
that happened to some extent intentionally, for various reasons, and it's to some extent that's just a natural result to a potentially scary situation. But I think it was created an overreaction. I how do I? What's your question exactly? How do I soft pedal the fact that I think that there was some really authoritarian, um, tendencies at play by trying to put the entire response on the backbone of censorship, propaganda, lockdowns, and mandating people take interventions that they may or may not want. Like, I think there are some authoritarian tendencies in that. I'm not saying that vaccines are uh, surreptitious way to microchip the population. I'm not saying that, vaccines are ineffective even. I'm just saying that cudgel of trying to force people to accept medicine inside their own body that is dictated by the government, it is a precedent that I am very, very wary of, because I wonder if I would be okay with that if Donald Trump was president, or Barack. It's like, am I okay with that no matter who is in charge? Like, no, I'm not. I can very easily see circumstances where I'm not cool with someone telling me what has to go into my body. So yeah, I don't know. What's your question? That's where I am. I'm not trying to soft pedal. I'm just saying that's my position on it. That's my opinion.
Well, we can touch on many topics in this discussion, but the overall topic is you are running for Congress, and you will have, if you are to be elected, you have to appeal to not just the people of Vermont, but the voters of Vermont.
Well put.
And in my experience, the voters in Vermont are overwhelmingly in support of COVID branded authoritarianism.
That seems to be the case, but
in which case you are not representative of those, of that electorate.
I'm not. And that may be my Achilles heel. I don't know. I think people like authenticity regardless. And I'm clearly not a one issue zealot. And I think I'm trying to give a little bit of credit to the intelligence of the people who I'm asking to represent that. Hey, if you like 95% of what I'm saying and you disagree about some stuff, like maybe you can get past that. So I'll hope for that. But I also think there's a dynamic at play where I'm sure you've heard of Matthias Desmet, the Belgian psychologist, who said, what's going on here? It's this breakdown of society, where he called it mass formation or whatever, some sort of public psychosis. But he was talking about whether or not any of that's true. What does strike me as incredibly accurate based on his rough description of what's happening is that a third of people are what you described as like pro-COVID extreme measures. And I would say a third of people are close to that, are more like me, like resistant, reluctant, skeptical. And then there's that probably close to 50% of people in the middle that are just trying to live their lives and put their chips on whoever's going to make their life easier by conforming with. So I think that mitigates what you're talking about, is like, I'm a heretic on this issue. I think most people, they're done with it. They're not thinking about this as the most important critical issue to them. And that helps my cause. And although many people are in favor of it, a lot of people, it's not their issue. They're just trying to get by with their lives.
Now, in some respects, Vladimir Putin brought the pandemic to a close by invading Ukraine.
That. Yeah. And that's when the population switched from being virologists to being geopolitics Ukraine experts.
Mm-hmm. So on the topic of geopolitics, right now, the United States is a imperial power with global military strike capacity and enormous political influence, economic influence, but also enormous cultural influence, so-called soft power. The U.S. has about 800 foreign military bases in 170 countries, something like that. And some people, and I've even made this argument, say that, if you realize that you're an empire, it doesn't necessarily follow from that you immediately decide to stop being an empire, because if you create a power vacuum, somebody else is likely to step up to fill that vacuum, and that might be worse than what we have now with the U.S.-led world. So what's your vision for the U.S. role in the global community?
Not the cop.
Who should be the cop?
I don't think there should be a cop. I think there should be a community.
Are you a defund the police guy?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, nothing close to that. But the global imperial cop, I'm maybe a bit of a defund the global imperial cop. And I think your point is very valid that you can't create a complete power vacuum, but I don't think there is. I think we are stepping into a multipolar world regardless. So, there's not going to be um, a complete changing of the guard overnight. And as long as, it would help us enormously, in my opinion, to have the moral authority to actually say Vladimir Putin should not be waging wars of aggression on his neighbors. Unfortunately, we don't. We don't have that moral authority. But if we could get to a point where we do use our power in service of creating a more beautiful world and protecting vulnerable people, and not just in service of our own power and the sake of our own interests, I think leading by example in that regard would be important.
So I don't think there's anybody. I mean, maybe there's a few weird, tankies or something who think that it's a good thing that Russia has invaded Ukraine.
Right.
I think, pretty much everybody agrees it's a bad thing that the Russians shouldn't do that. The question is, what's the United States going to do about it?
Yeah.
And what's the United States? What are we willing to do about it if confronting Russia militarily runs any significant risk of starting a nuclear war?
Yeah. So avoid that.
Yeah.
First and foremost. So all these idiots saying no fly zone, to me, they have no credibility. They don't have working brains, right? If you're willing to risk a nuclear war for Ukraine, I really have very little tolerance for you.
You can declare a no-fly zone. There's no reason to expect that the Russians would abide by it, but to enforce a no-fly zone, that means shooting down Russian military aircraft and destroying, surface-to-air missile emplacements on Russian soil.
War. It just means war with Russia.
It means attacking Russia on their soil.
Which is, it's just a Washington think tank propaganda strategy to say, how do we push the most aggressive policy towards Russia possible, but make it sound somewhat more reasonable. And so they say, package it as no-fly zone. The Mint Press News did a study of like a couple hundred recent Ukraine articles between the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. And there was unanimous agreement, between like 95, almost all of the editorial pieces were pro-aggressive stance towards Russia, which I think is, I'm not saying Russia is in the right here. My ideal solution for this situation would be to, first priority, avoid war with Russia. And second priority is to negotiate, to encourage negotiations as quickly as possible. I don't think arm the Ukrainians so that we can create another Afghanistan for Russia and weaken our adversary is actually in the best interest of the Ukrainian people. So I think what is in the interest of the Ukrainian people is to end it as quickly as possible. And I think that's probably going to happen through negotiations.
What's your position on NATO?
I mean, I don't think NATO should have expanded to the east as much as it did.
But that's a done deal, and I don't think the Estonians want to leave NATO.
Right. So I think we're stuck with where it is, but trying to expand it is exactly, a contributing factor to how we ended up in this situation in the first place. And this was called, predicted by everyone who knew about the Russian geopolitics for decades. That's why George H.W. Bush agreed with Mikhail Gorbachev to not expand NATO. So, I think, doing it more is foolhardy.
Germany, the German personality, once they've switched tracks and they're no longer expanding militarily, but they're devoting all of their energies and impressive organizational power to building their economy, they've built an astounding economy. So it's not just because they haven't had to pay for their own defense for the past 70 years, but that's certainly been an advantage to them. And various U.S. presidents, most forcefully, but Donald Trump, but others before him, have tried to suggest to the Germans and other NATO partners, hey, you guys should do a little bit more in this whole military alliance thing. It's like the U.S. is doing most of it, and you guys have just signed your name on to be, sort of symbolic partners. You need to do more. And Vladimir Putin has accomplished that. Not just Germany, but various European countries are drastically upping their military spending now. Do you consider that to be a positive development?
Wow, it's hard for me to call that a positive development exactly, but I guess I
If the
agree with.
alternative is that the United States taxpayers fund the bill for the defense of those nations.
Yeah, compared to that alternative, it's absolutely a positive development. But yeah, I mean, I think Trump is a very big can of worms, but in that narrow subject, getting NATO partners to pay more, I think he was right.
Well, I've offered you the opportunity to make a blanket denunciation of both Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and you didn't do it. So, by the logic of the mainstream media, you must support both of those gentlemen in every way.
That is correct by the logic of the mainstream media.
So, which is good news because now you're going to be awash in Russian cash to fund your campaign.
Oh, I mean, that's nothing new. Yeah, from the beginning. I have a friend.
If the camera pans down, you're just sitting on a pallet of dollars, right? Just stacks of $100 bills.
I have nowhere to spend it. I try to bring it to the grocery store. They hate me.
Oh, actually, you didn't read the fine print. They sent you the money in rubles.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So courting the Russians is probably not going to fund your campaign. You're going to have to get some support from somewhere. What avenues are you exploring?
The avenues available to a middle class guy who doesn't really know that many people in the 1%. So basically getting attention through media and through volunteers to come to my website to donate, which is rebirthdemocracy.com. So I put a goal out there to receive $10,000 by April 15th, which is coming up. And that would basically be a strong determinant if I should even try to stay in this campaign. I think with $10,000 that generated over the course of a couple of weeks, I can leverage through multiple means to actually be a contender. And I'm around halfway there, and we have some events coming up. I think I'm confident we can make it. I've seen a good uptick. The more attention I get, the more people want to fund it.
Well, is there anything that you would like to say in terms of your plans, your ambitions, your ideals that we haven't touched on?
I'd like to leave it on the idea that in the biggest picture, humans have, thanks to technology, the power of gods. And unless and until we develop the wisdom and love of gods, we're in danger. And I don't mean just in danger of survival, because humans are incredibly resilient and we can live in very despotic and miserable conditions, but we're in danger of losing everything beautiful. And I think putting that at the heart, that our problems are created by our ability to innovate quicker than we can be wise about what we're innovating. So if you see what I'm saying as an opportunity to balance those scales, then help me out. I think that's the idea.
So where can people find you on social media? Not Facebook, obviously.
Well, I did restart an illegal account, but I'm probably just going to get kicked off again. But yeah, I was off Facebook for over a year. You can find me at Liam Madden or Rebirth Democracy, rebirthdemocracy.com. That's about it. That's where I am.
No Twitter?
I am on Twitter, but I'm not really active on Twitter at all. I'm probably going to hire somebody if I get this $10,000 goal to be a campaign manager who does that type of thing. So that's forthcoming.
What do you think of Elon Musk now being the largest shareholder in Twitter?
Oh,
and a newly appointed member of the board?
I don't have a thought out opinion about that, but it strikes me as meh. Like, of course, the incestuous, billionaires controlling how we get to make sense of the world, which you alluded to a little bit earlier. Like that's right on track. Like what I'm not surprised by that.
What do you think about going to Mars?
I mean, kind of cool from a curiosity, human adventurousness. Like, can't deny that it's kind of cool. But the idea of Elon Musk to terraform Mars and create a breakaway civilization, that kind of techno optimist utopia is insane to me. And like, we are of this planet. What's to prevent us from having the same exact type of need to escape to another place from the colony on Mars if we don't figure this out right now? So yeah, I'm more of a invest in Earth. It's pretty beautiful, and I'm more of that kind of guy.
I'm not a across the board Neil deGrasse Tyson fan, but he did say one thing that I really, really agree with, which is we've explored all the planets in the solar system, and what we've discovered is that Earth is the best one.
Yeah. I'm likewise not a complete across the board Neil deGrasse Tyson fan, but that's a good one.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Liam, it was good touching base with you, and I wish you the best of luck, sincerely.
Thank you. And you said you could help just ingratiate this content to Fact?
I will send them the link to it. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.